The snow is falling outside my window in Portland today, a soft gray blanket that seems to muffle the rest of the world. It's the kind of silence that feels heavy, almost physical. For most people, this time of year is a frantic race toward connection, a desperate gathering of bodies in warm rooms. But for you, sitting there in the quiet of your own space, the world looks at you with a specific kind of pity. They imagine you devastated. They picture you scrolling through glowing Instagram feeds, watching families huddled around Douglas firs, perhaps weeping into a lukewarm takeout container, drowning in a sea of holiday-induced loneliness. They send those worried texts, the ones with too many heart emojis, asking if you're really spending it alone, their voices thickening with a shock that feels more like a judgment than a concern. To them, December 25th without a family table is the saddest thing they could possibly imagine. But here is what they don't tell you about the psychology of the solitary holiday. Here is the secret they aren't equipped to understand. The loneliest Christmases you ever had weren't the ones where you were alone. They were the ones where you actually showed up. They were the years you spent surrounded by the people who raised you, sitting at a table where you were completely unseen, performing a version of gratitude while your entire nervous system was screaming for the nearest exit. You were there physically occupying a chair, smiling through interrogations about your career, or your weight, or your relationship status, managing everyone's turbulent emotions, while your own heart was drifting further and further out to sea. This year you are alone, and for the first time in a decade you might realize you aren't actually lonely. You are finally, perhaps for the first time, at peace. There is a hollow ache in the American holiday tradition, a demand for togetherness that often acts as a mask for deep systemic disconnection. We are taught from birth that blood is the ultimate bond, an unbreakable tether that justifies any amount of emotional cost. But what happens when the cost of belonging is the betrayal of your own identity? We find ourselves in a state of chronic performing. In my work observing the architecture of modern loneliness, I've found that many people don't fear being alone. They fear the exhaustion of being not themselves in a room full of people who claim to love them. It is a quiet internal erosion. You spend hours calculating the emotional temperature of the room, noticing when your father has had one too many whiskeys, or when your mother's voice gains that sharp, passive-aggressive edge because the turkey isn't perfect. You become an amateur diplomat in a war you never declared a peacekeeper for a family that refuses to heal. This is the core pain we rarely name the trauma of the invisible guest. It's the realization that you could disappear from the conversation and it would take them 20 minutes to notice because they aren't talking to you. They are talking to the role you play in their holiday theater. When you finally stop showing up, people call you distant or difficult. They say you've changed. And they are right. You have changed. You've stopped being a character in their story so that you can finally start being the protagonist of your own. Choosing to spend this day alone isn't an act of hatred. It's an act of self-preservation. It is a refusal to keep pouring your vital energy into a vessel that has a hole in the bottom. Today we are going to look at why your body has been begging you to stay home for years and why this silence isn't a tragedy, it's a sanctuary. We are going to deconstruct the counterfeit feast and understand the profound quiet courage it takes to choose an empty room over a crowded table that requires you to disappear. This is about the psychology of finally choosing yourself when no one else would. I want you to travel back with me for a moment, not to a specific date, but to a feeling. It's a sensory memory that lives in the marrow of your bones. Close your eyes and imagine you are 8 years old again. It's Christmas afternoon. The house is thick with the smell of roasting meat and the cloying scent of pine needles drying out in the heat of the radiator. The adults are in the living room, their laughter loud and jagged, discussing things that occupy the world of grown-ups, politics, neighborhood gossip, the price of things. You have something in your hand, maybe a small toy or a drawing you spent all morning perfecting. You have a thought, an idea, a tiny spark of excitement that feels like it's glowing in your chest. You walk into the circle of noise. You wait for a gap, a breath, a moment where you can share this part of yourself. You open your mouth to speak, but before the first syllable can leave your lips, someone talks over you. Not with malice, but with a casual, devastating indifference. You try again and again, you are talked over. You realize standing there with your drawing in your hand that the air in this room is already full. There is no space for your voice. You sit down at the table, clutching your fork, and you watch the performance continue without you. This is the moment you learn that even in a room full of people who share your DNA, you can be completely invisible. Or perhaps the memory is older, you're 16 now. The cinematic lens shifts to the upstairs hallway. You are sitting on the floor of your bedroom trying to wrap a gift for your younger sibling. Your hands are shaking. Downstairs, the muffled sound of your parents fighting vibrates through the floorboards. It's the same fight they had last year. It's the script they've been rehearsing for a decade. You realize that the magic of Christmas is something you have to manufacture with your own bare hands because no one is creating it for you. You are already playing the role of the peacekeeper, the emotional mediator. You are learning that love is a job, a performance you must give to keep the house from imploding. These moments are the blueprints for your current solitude. They are the scenes that taught your nervous system that family celebration is synonymous with suppression of self. Every forced smile over a gift that showed they didn't know you at all, a generic sweater, a book in a genre you hate was a micro-trauma. You thanked them anyway. You performed the role of the grateful child, because making them feel bad for not seeing you felt more dangerous than pretending you were seen. You learned to manage their disappointment, their anger, and their insecurities, all while your own needs were filed away as inconvenient. Now fast forward to today. The camera pans through your current living space. It's quiet. There is no one shouting over you. There is no one requiring you to be the successful one or the happy one. The light in your room is soft, hitting the floor in long, steady rectangles. Maybe you made yourself a cup of coffee, and as you hold it, you realize there is no dread in your chest. You aren't calculating how early you can leave without causing a scene. You aren't rehearsing answers to questions you know are coming like pointed arrows. Are you still at that job? Why are you still single? You look tired. In this quiet, the hollowness isn't a void, it's a container. For the first time, the space around you isn't occupied by the heavy, demanding ghosts of other people's expectations. You look at the chair across from you and it's empty, and that emptiness feels like a luxury. It's the feeling of a cast being removed after a bone has been broken for years. It's itchy and strange, and the skin underneath is sensitive, but the crushing pressure is gone. This is the cinema of the self, a slow-burn film where nothing happens, but everything changes. You are finally watching the world through your own eyes, not through the lens of who they need you to be. This is what it looks like when a person finally decides to stop being an extra in their own life and chooses to be the only person in the room. To truly understand why your body reacts to the holidays with such profound resistance, we have to look past the poetry of the soul and into the hard wiring of the brain. For years, you might have blamed yourself for being difficult or antisocial, but your biology has actually been performing a masterclass in survival. Your brain is a predictive organ. It uses past data to prepare you for future threats. When your phone buzzes with a text from home, it isn't just reading words, it's activating a neural map of every emotional injury you've ever sustained in that environment. According to clinical neuroscience, the feeling of dread you experience in the weeks leading up to December is the activation of your hypothalamic pituitary adrenal HPA axis. This is your body's alarm system. For someone who grew up in an emotionally unsafe or performative household, the family table isn't a place of nourishment. It's a high-threat environment. Even if there is no physical violence, the threat of being misunderstood, judged, or emotionally erased triggers the same amygdala response as a physical predator. Your brain initiates a fight, flight, or freeze sequence. Because you cannot fight your parents without social fallout and you cannot always fly, leave you settle into a state of functional freeze, or what we in psychology call dissociation. This is where the hollowness, or emotional numbing, comes in. When the cost of being present is too high, the brain's prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for complex thought and personality, begins to offline its connection to your emotional centers to protect you from the pain of being unseen. You become a hollowed-out version of yourself. You can pass the salt, you can laugh at the jokes, and you can answer the questions, but you aren't actually there. You are operating on a biological autopilot. We can explain this through the lens of polyvagal theory. When we feel safe, we are in a state of social engagement. But when we are forced into social situations that feel emotionally predatory, our nervous system drops into a dorsal vagal shutdown. This is the most primitive survival mechanism we have. It's what a prey animal does when it realizes it cannot escape. It goes limp. It numbs itself so that the impending bite won't hurt as much. If you've ever sat at a holiday dinner and felt a strange, heavy fog descend over your mind, a feeling where your voice sounds far away and your emotions are flat, You weren't being moody. You were in a dorsal vagal state. Your system was literally numbing your heart so you could survive the afternoon. Furthermore, we must talk about the reward system and dopamine. In a healthy connection, seeing family should trigger a release of oxytocin and dopamine, the chemicals of bonding and pleasure. However, for those with a history of conditional love, these gatherings often result in a reward prediction error. Your brain hopes for connection but receives judgment instead. Over time, the brain stops producing dopamine in response to these people. Instead, it produces cortisol, the stress hormone. Your anhedonia, that inability to feel joy during the most wonderful time of the year, is actually a sophisticated recalibration. Your brain is saying, stop looking for water in this dry well. It's wasting our energy. When you choose to spend Christmas alone, you are finally allowing your parasympathetic nervous system to take the wheel. You are telling your amygdala that the predator is no longer at the door. For the first time, your cortisol levels can drop and your prefrontal cortex can come back online. This is why the quiet of your apartment feels so profound. It's not just peace and quiet. It's the physiological cessation of a decades-long survival reflex. Your brain is finally being given the safety signal it has been starving for since you were 8 years old. Beyond the firing of neurons and the flood of cortisol lies a deeper, more existential architecture, the structure of the performative self. In clinical psychology, we often look at the internal family systems model, or the concept of the false self, a term coined by psychoanalyst Donald Winnicott. For many who spend the holidays alone, their childhood was an apprenticeship in the art of disappearance. You learned very early that your family's love wasn't a warm, unconditional blanket, it was a narrow path with high walls. To stay on that path, to keep the peace and ensure your own survival, you had to leave the inconvenient parts of your soul at the door. This is the psychological tax of the American holiday. We are a culture that prioritizes the image of the family over the health of the individuals within it. Think about the family photo, everyone dressed in matching sweaters, teeth bared in a coordinated smile. To the outside world, this is a picture of belonging. But to the person inside that photo who is suffering from emotional abandonment, that picture is a record of a crime. It is evidence of a moment where you were forced to pretend that everything was fine while your internal reality was being ignored. This is what we call cognitive dissonance, the agonizing mental friction that occurs when your external environment flatly contradicts your internal truth. When you sit at that table, you aren't just eating a meal. You are participating in a system of collective denial. Maybe your father's drinking is the elephant in the room that no one mentions. Maybe your sister's passive aggression is treated as a quirk rather than a weapon. When you decide to stop attending, you aren't just skipping a dinner bypassing the family script. You are the whistleblower of the family system. By your absence, you are saying, the emperor has no clothes. This connection we pretend to have is actually an obligation disguised as love. This leads us to the concept of enmeshment. In many families, boundaries are seen as an insult. To have a different opinion, a different lifestyle, or even a different emotional state than the group is perceived as a betrayal. If the family is happy, you must be happy. If the family is traditional, your unconventional life is a threat. Spending Christmas alone is the ultimate act of individuation. It is the final stage of growing up, the moment you realize that your primary loyalty is no longer to the tribe that raised you, but to the truth of your own experience. We must also address the grief of the living. There is a specific kind of mourning that happens when you are alone on the holidays. It isn't a mourning for the family you have, it's a mourning for the family you deserved. As you sit in your quiet apartment, you might feel a wave of sadness. Society tells you this sadness means you made a mistake, that you should pick up the phone and apologize for being difficult. But from a depth psychology perspective, that sadness is actually gestalt completion. You are finally feeling the grief that you were too busy performing to feel for the last 20 years. You are grieving the fact that you have to protect yourself from the people who were supposed to be your sanctuary. That grief is honest. That grief is holy. And unlike the forced joy of the family table, this grief has the power to actually heal you. You are choosing honest loneliness over dishonest belonging. Honest loneliness is a clean wound. It can heal. It is simply the state of being physically by yourself. Dishonest belonging, however, is an infection. It requires you to lie to yourself every single minute. It requires you to suppress your nervous system until it breaks. By staying home, you are finally allowing the false self to starve so that the true self can finally breathe. You are realizing that a room full of people who don't know who you are is the loneliest place on earth. When you look at a landscape after a forest fire, there is a haunting stillness. To the casual observer, it looks like a tragedy, a blackened, hollowed-out waste. But to a forest ecologist, that scorched earth is a profound necessity. The fire cleared the suffocating undergrowth that was preventing new life from reaching the sun. This is how I want you to view your anhedonia, your emotional numbness during this season. It isn't a sign that you are broken. It is the prescribed burn of your soul. For years, you have been told that feeling nothing is a symptom of a disorder. But in the world of MindRabbit, we look at things differently. We ask, what is the numbness trying to tell us? If you feel hollow as you sit alone while the rest of the world celebrates, I want you to consider that this hollowness is actually your first taste of freedom. You have spent so much of your life being a full vessel for other people's emotions, absorbing your mother's anxiety, your father's unspoken regrets, your siblings' competition, that you had no room left for your own contents. The numbness you feel now is the sensation of finally being empty of them. This is the Evan Reed insight I want you to carry. Anhedonia is often the brain's way of declaring a moratorium on counterfeit joy. If the only joy available to you is the kind that requires you to shrink to lie or to perform, your brain will eventually stop recognizing it as joy at all. It will treat it as a toxin. The reason you can't get into the holiday spirit isn't because you are cold-hearted. It's because your spirit has developed an allergy to the performative. You are no longer willing to accept crumbs of attention and call it a feast of connection. Think of your energy like a limited currency. Every year you spent showing up was an investment in a dying stock. You were pouring your emotional capital into a system that gave you a 0% return on your authentic self. Choosing to spend Christmas alone is the moment you decide to divest. You are taking your capital back. And yes, at first your bank account looks empty. That's the numbness. But an empty account is better than one that is constantly being drained by bad actors. I often think about the concept of the second silence. The first silence is the one where you are ignored by others, the child at the table who is talked over. That silence is painful. It's a wound. But the second silence is the one you choose. It's the silence of your own locked door. It's the silence of a phone that has been silenced. This second silence is an architectural feat. It is a space you have built for yourself where no one else's voice is allowed to dictate the emotional temperature. In this space, you aren't missing out. You are opting in. You are opting into the reality of your own existence. If that reality is currently quiet or gray or even a bit sad, then so be it. At least it is your reality. There is a profound dignity in being honestly sad that far outweighs the indignity of being dishonestly happy. You are finally allowing the fire of your boundaries to clear out the undergrowth of obligation. And underneath that charred soil, that's where the seeds of who you actually are have been waiting for decades to finally see the light. You aren't empty. You are finally gloriously unoccupied. In our modern landscape, we have been sold a version of family that is more hallmark than human. We treat the nuclear family as a static, holy monument, something that must be preserved at all costs, even if the cost is the mental health of the people inside it. But in psychological terms, we need to broaden our definition of what constitutes a tribe. We must examine the difference between a system of origin and a community of choice. There is a cultural gaslighting that happens this time of year. Every commercial, every song, every storefront tells you that coming home is the ultimate redemption. But for those who grew up in environments of subtle trauma or emotional neglect, home isn't a place of return. It's a place of departure. We often feel a crushing guilt because we believe we are breaking a fundamental law of nature by staying away. However, many clinical models of human development suggest that separation individuation is actually the goal of a healthy life. If your family system prevents you from being an autonomous, truthful version of yourself, then leaving isn't a failure of love. It's a success of development. We must also deconstruct the emotional tax of the American middle-class holiday. We are a society that runs on high-functioning dissociation. We value the ability to push through and make it work. We praise the person who can sit through a tense, passive-aggressive dinner with a smile on their face. We call it maturity. But in the world of nervous system regulation, that isn't maturity, it's trauma adaptation. We are rewarding people for their ability to disconnect from their own gut feelings. By choosing to spend this day alone, you are essentially going on strike against this culture of forced participation. Let's look at the concept of ambiguous loss. This is a term used to describe a loss that occurs without closure or clear understanding. When you distance yourself from family, you aren't mourning a death. You are mourning the possibility of a relationship. You are mourning the dream of the family you wish you had. This is often harder to process than a funeral because the people are still there, the table is still set, and the invitations are still sent. The loss is ambiguous because the shell of the relationship remains even though the soul of it has been gone for years. By staying in your own space, you are finally giving yourself permission to stop trying to solve the unsolvable. You are accepting the ambiguous loss. You are realizing that no matter how many gifts you buy or how many hours you drive, you cannot force a closed heart to open. You cannot make someone hear you if they are committed to not listening. This realization is painful, yes, but it is also incredibly grounding. It stops the hovering of your soul. It allows you to finally land in your own life. We often think of boundaries as walls, but I want you to think of them as gates. A wall is meant to keep everyone out. A gate is meant to control who has access to your inner sanctum. For years, your gate was broken and people walked in and out, trampling your peace and leaving their emotional trash behind. Today, you've closed the gate. Not to be cruel, but to begin the work of gardening your own internal landscape. You are redefining family, not as a biological inevitability, but as an earned sanctuary. You are moving from a state of passive belonging, where you are accepted only if you comply to active integrity, where you only belong where you are truly seen. If you're listening to this and feeling the weight of your own quiet room, I want you to take a breath. Not a self-help breath, but a physiological one, the kind that signals to your ribs that they are allowed to expand. Recovery from a lifetime of performance doesn't look like a sudden burst of joy. It looks like the slow, steady return of your own senses. It looks like rehabituating yourself to a world where you are not a target. The first step in this recovery is validating the exhaustion. For decades, you've been running an emotional marathon in a suit of armor that didn't fit. You're not lazy this Christmas. You are recovering from a long-term survival state. If you want to sleep until noon, do it. If you want to eat cereal for dinner because the idea of a proper meal feels like a chore, let that be enough. You are learning to listen to the quietest voice in the room, your own needs. In the world of clinical psychology, we call this self-attunement. It is the process of finally becoming a good parent to yourself, providing the validation and safety that the original system couldn't offer. There is a profound lesson here about radical acceptance. Many of us spend our adult lives trying to fix the family dynamic. We think if we just find the right words or show enough success or stay calm enough during the fight, they will finally see us. But recovery begins when you stop trying to change the script of others and start writing your own. You accept that they may never understand why you aren't there. You accept that they might call you selfish or cold. And you realize that their opinion of you is none of your business. Your only business is the maintenance of your own inner peace. The lesson for the soul. In our modern hustle culture, we are taught that even our healing must be productive. We want a 5-step plan to overcome holiday trauma. But real healing from emotional abandonment is nonlinear and subtractive. It is not about adding new skills. It is about subtracting the lies you were told about who you have to be. Here is an insight you can apply immediately. Practice the power of the non-response. When that guilt-tripping text arrives or the phone rings with a voice that sounds like a demand, you do not have to explain. You do not have to justify your peace. Explaining is a form of negotiating for your right to exist, and you have already won that right. The silence you keep is the boundary that protects the new, fragile version of yourself that is currently growing. True recovery is realizing that you are not a broken version of their expectations. You are a whole version of your own truth. Every minute you spend in your own company without apologizing for it is a victory. You are retraining your nervous system to associate alone with safe. You are building a new neural pathway that says, my value is not tied to my performance. As you sit in the stillness of today, recognize that you aren't missing the holiday. You are finally, after all these years, truly celebrating yourself. As the light begins to fade on this December afternoon, casting long blue shadows across the floor of your room, I want you to take a moment to look around. Really look. Notice the lack of tension in your jaw. Notice the way your breath moves all the way down into your stomach without hitting a wall of anxiety. This is the architecture of your peace. It's quiet, yes. It might even feel a bit cold or unfamiliar, but it belongs entirely to you. The world will tell you that what you've done today is a tragedy, that you are a warning tale of what happens when a person gives up on family. They will use words like grudge, stubborn, or unforgiving, but they don't know the math of your soul. They don't know that for every year you showed up, you lost a little more of your ability to trust the world. They don't know that staying home wasn't an act of war, but a treaty of peace between you and your own heart. There is a profound courage in being the person who breaks the cycle. In every family, there is usually one person who is assigned the role of carrying the truth. You are that person. By refusing to participate in the collective denial of a happy holiday, you are actually doing the most loving thing possible. You are being honest. You are refusing to accept the counterfeit version of love that requires you to disappear. You are holding out for the real thing, a connection where you are seen, heard, and valued for the complex, beautiful, and sometimes difficult human being you actually are. The final insight. We often think of the meaning of Christmas as a story about a birth in a cold, distant place. Perhaps for you, that story can take on a new psychological dimension. Today is the birth of your autonomy. It is the beginning of a life where your yes means yes and your no means safety. You are no longer a hollow vessel, waiting to be filled by the demands of others. You are a sovereign territory. As you move into the evening, don't feel the need to do anything special to mark the day. The special part has already happened. You chose yourself. You listened to the wisdom of your nervous system and you honored the boundaries of your soul. That is a more profound gift than anything that could ever be wrapped in paper and tied with a ribbon. In the silence of this evening, I want you to hear this one truth. You are not broken for needing this. You are not cold for protecting your heart. And you are certainly not alone. You are part of a quiet, growing tribe of people who are redefining what it means to belong. We are the ones who have realized that the most important home we will ever return to is the one inside our own chest. Sleep well tonight. There is no dread waiting for you in the morning. No post-holiday exhaustion from a performance that drained your spirit. Just the steady, rhythmic quiet of a life that is finally, honestly, and courageously your own. I'm Evan Reed, and this has been MindRabbit. Thank you for walking through the silence with me.